This is a gypsy moth caterpillar. Now, like most caterpillars, it leads a very simple life. In the evening, it'll climb up to the top of trees, and it spends the rest of the night feeding. As the sun rises, it will descend into the shade to escape the heat of the daytime. On occasion, though, these caterpillars will reverse this behavior. They'll suddenly start to climb to the top of the tree during the midday sun, where they essentially overheat, they die, and they melt. For years, scientists wondered why this was occurring, and they would notice that this would occur in specific colonies living in particular trees. And it wasn't until the discovery of a single virus that infects all of these caterpillars and that changes just a single gene that we finally understood what was going on. So the change in this gene drives these caterpillars to reverse their behavior, and this will then lead to the spread of the virus as the caterpillars melt. The melting caterpillars infect neighboring caterpillars that are healthy, and this carries on the virus's reproduction cycle. Toxoplasma gondii is a single-cell parasite that lives and breeds in the intestines of cats. Now, the challenge for the parasite is how to move from one cat to another, and it's developed a rather ingenious method for doing so. While it reproduces only in the intestine of a cat, it can infect other mammals, and this includes mice. Mice that are infected by the parasite really are quite asymptomatic, with the exception that they develop some odd behaviors. Whereas a normal mouse will avoid the scents of cats and avoid wide open spaces, infected mice actually approach the scents of cats and will move readily into wide open spaces, which leads to situations something akin to this, which most of us would expect would lead to this. Mice that are infected by the parasite are much more likely to be eaten by cats, thereby transporting the parasite into the gut of its next host and continuing its life cycle. So these are just two examples of many, many situations in which single-cell organisms can directly influence or even control the behavior of more complex animals. However, the ability of microorganisms to alter behavior is not confined to simple animals like caterpillars and mice. Anyone who has ever experienced a cold or food poisoning will appreciate that some of the symptoms associated with these illnesses, like sneezing or vomiting, may be a sign that our body is actually trying to get rid of the toxins. However, they're also very efficient methods for spreading the infectious agent. A single sneeze can contain as many as 100,000 germs, each of which is capable of infecting another person. Which brings me to the human GI tract. We know that there are more than 500 species of microorganisms that inhabit the GI tract. Now, estimates are that this accounts for about 2 kilograms of microorganisms in each of us. In contrast, the human brain only weighs 1.3 kilograms on average. Now, the brain and GI tract communicate constantly via nerves and hormones, and this is a bidirectional communication. The brain sends signals down to our gut, which tells our stomach and our intestines how to react in terms of the environmental stimuli. So as I stand before everyone here tonight and my stomach does flip-flops and has butterflies, I'm acutely aware of my brain sending signals down to signal that I'm stressed. However, 90% of all the communication goes in the opposite direction. It carries information from the GI tract up to the brain. And since we know that many of these microbes are capable of affecting our GI tract and are also capable of producing chemicals that we can detect, it's not that much of a stretch to imagine that these microbes might be actually influencing our behavior. The community of microorganisms inhabiting the human gastrointestinal tract is known as the human gut microbiota. Now, what we understand is the number of cells inside our intestines outnumber the total number of our own body's cells by a factor of 10 to 1. The genetic material they contain outnumbers our own genetic material by about 100 to 1. This gut microbiota develops over a lifetime and is unique to each individual. It's like a fingerprint. We understand that prior to birth, the GI tract is sterile. However, during the process of birth, we're actually colonized by microbes from our mothers. And so each of us can trace some of these microbes back to our mothers. Once they've established a colony, this microbiome then forms a symbiotic relationship with us, and this has numerous benefits. So for example, a robust microbiota will compete against hostile microorganisms that we might ingest sometime later in life. And so thereby it provides a protective factor. Another benefit of this is the fact that some of these microorganisms can break down complex carbohydrates or other substances that we're normally incapable of digesting. As a result, we directly benefit by being able to obtain nutrition from foods that we normally couldn't eat. As one would imagine, this means that having a healthy microbiota is very beneficial to humans. Now, these are established through a variety of childhood experiences, and one of the ones I've already mentioned is through childbirth. We understand that through natural childbirth, children obtain the initial microbes that set up colonies inside our intestines, and that children who are born via natural childbirth end up with much more robust and diverse microbiota than children born via C-section. Similarly, children who are breastfed actually have much more robust colonies, and this is linked to lower instances of asthma and skin allergies as well as food allergies. Another factor that affects us is the diversity of food we ingest, especially as a child, but this actually spans our entire lifespan. And so when we eat a diverse diet that is rich in whole foods, but also has probiotics like yogurt, we actually can greatly increase the efficiency as well as the diversity of this microbiota, and this gives us real health benefits. A takeaway from this is you are what you eat. And what you eat directly impacts what you can eat in the future, but it also impacts your health as well as potentially your behavior. As a result of this, scenes like this, which most parents are familiar with, aren't necessarily as bad for her as one might think. As I alluded to earlier, there is a growing body of evidence that imbalances in the microbiota can influence behavior, and sometimes in very detrimental ways. So abnormal levels of particular bacteria or imbalances between the different microbes have been linked to things like obesity, eczema, as well as psychiatric disorders like anxiety. Some of the strongest evidence comes from what are known as nodobiotic mice. And these are mice in which antibiotics are introduced that wipe out their native microbiota, and then they're raised in sterile environments. What this creates is essentially a germ-free mouse. Now, if we take these germ-free mice and we inject them with gut microbes from a mouse with a particular characteristic or disorder, in this case an obese mouse, the result is the germ-free mouse will develop obesity. Even more fascinating is if we take gut microbes from a human, say one with depression, the mouse will develop symptoms of depression, and this includes decreases in exploratory behavior as well as decreases in overall activity. So there's two big implications here. First of all, it's that these microbes can actually affect behavior across species. They're not limited to just one species. The other implication here is that we may be able to develop very novel treatments for disorders that we thought were brain disorders, which may in fact be because of these imbalances. To sum this up, in certain cases, situation can become disposition. Things that we're exposed to early on in childhood can fundamentally change who we are and establish traits that last a lifetime. Another way of putting this is the smallest little factors in life may have huge impacts on who we are and how we behave. And so when we think about the wider world, we have to realize we're not just part of the ecosystem. We are actually an ecosystem unto ourselves, and that ultimately this ecosystem shapes exactly who we are. Thank you.